Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. You don't wake up thinking, today's the day I get fired. At least, I didn't. I woke up thinking about my mother's latest blood test results and how I'd promised her I'd be home by 8 with her favorite lentil soup. I even remember texting my team good luck on their campaign push. We were so close to wrapping Q2 numbers, just 1 week away from the bonuses. 1 week. I arrived early, like always. Coffee in one hand, bagel in the other, logging in before most people even swiped their badges. 6 years of service, 3 promotions, no sick days in over a year. I was proud of what I'd built in that glass box of an office, but pride doesn't mean anything when the company decides you're obsolete. At 10:17 a.m., I got a Slack from HR. Can you come by for a quick chat? I thought it was about onboarding our new intern. I didn't expect the conference room to be ice cold, or the HR manager, Gail, a woman I'd once invited to my birthday dinner, to avoid my eyes as she gestured toward the chair across from her. Next to her sat Oliver, my manager. His arms were crossed like he'd just reviewed a mildly disappointing quarterly report, not someone's livelihood. Mariana, Gail began, her voice wrapped in faux compassion. This isn't easy. That's when I knew. We've decided to terminate your employment with Crestmore effective immediately, she said, reading from a page like it was an actor's cue card. This decision is final and not open to discussion. I blinked. I'm sorry? Oliver didn't speak, just nodded once, like this was all very normal. No cause? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You're firing me a week before bonuses after We appreciate your service, Gail said quickly, cutting me off. But the company is moving in a different direction. My bonus. That wasn't just money. That was my mother's medication, her surgery consultation, the specialists not covered by our basic health plan. I'd timed everything around that payout, and now they were pulling the rug with surgical precision. But they'd made one mistake. One beautiful, contractual oversight. In the panic storm whirling through my mind, something solid surfaced. My employment agreement, negotiated 3 years ago when I'd saved a product launch from imploding during a data breach, had a clause. A golden parachute disguised in dry legalese. Section 14B. If the employee is terminated without cause within 30 days of scheduled bonus distribution, the company shall remit an alternative severance equal to 20% of the quarterly net profit, as last reported. I remembered it because I'd fought like hell to get it added. They thought I'd forgotten. They were wrong. So I sat there, blinking slowly, trying to control the tremble in my hands. Oliver finally spoke, smug. It's just business, Mariana. You'll bounce back. I turned to him. Did you read my contract before signing off on this? He frowned. What? I didn't answer. I stood up, collected my things with deliberate calm, and left the room without another word. Back at my desk, my system access was already revoked. A polite digital purge. But I didn't need my laptop. I had a copy of my contract at home, printed, annotated, safe. They thought this was a clean cut. But they'd just stepped into the fight of their lives. And they didn't even know it yet. I didn't cry when I left the building. I thought I might. 6 years of my life evaporated in a 15-minute HR ambush, and I didn't even get to say goodbye to my team. But instead of tears, I felt something colder, cleaner, like a wire had snapped inside me, and now everything was sharp and electric. The security guard downstairs, Jeff, gave me a sympathetic nod. He didn't ask questions, just buzzed me out with a soft, "Take care, Mariana." It was the kind of goodbye you give someone headed off to war. At home, I didn't unpack the box of office junk right away. I just dropped it on the dining table, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. The apartment was too quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. My phone buzzed with sympathy texts from coworkers who'd already heard. WTF happened? Are you okay? Oliver's an idiot. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not until I figured out what had just hit me. An hour later, I finally opened the box. I found the usual suspects: half-used notebooks, 3 dried-up highlighters, my old coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Manager." But at the bottom, under a stack of Post-it pads, was a manila envelope, labeled in my handwriting, "Employment, signed copy, UD. Udom." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I hadn't thought about that name in years. Udom Chuangsuanich was the first company lawyer I ever respected. Not because he was kind, he wasn't, but because he was careful. When Crestmore was still a scrappy startup, and I got promoted to lead the content division, Udom had helped me renegotiate my contract. It was one of those late-night Slack convos where legal's online because the founders can't sleep. I'd asked for more PTO. He offered stock options. I countered with profit sharing. He sent back a PDF with highlighted revisions and one simple line at the bottom. If terminated without cause within 30 days of the quarterly bonus, the employee shall be compensated with 20% of quarterly net profit. Clause 9.4b. Tiny print, buried between pages of boilerplate language. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now, as I sat cross-legged on the floor, holding that paper in my hands, the reality clicked into place like a lock turning. They fired me a week before bonuses. They gave no cause, which meant, by their own agreement, they owed me 20% of Crestmore's quarterly profits. My heart started racing. I pulled out my laptop, opened the latest investor summary, still public, thanks to our pre-IPO transparency pledge, and scrolled to the financials. Net profit, Q2, $8.1 million. 20% of that? $1.62 million. I stared at the number. Then I stared at the ceiling. Then I laughed. Not the bitter kind. The kind that bubbles up from disbelief, like my body didn't know what else to do. Oliver had fired me to avoid paying out my expected $30K bonus. He didn't realize he now owed me 54 times that. Because of one overlooked clause. Because of Udom. I set the contract gently on the table like it was made of glass. My hands were still trembling, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. They wanted to erase me. Instead, they just handed me a legal grenade with the pin still in, and I was ready to pull. The first thing I did the next morning was text my friend Sophia. Sophia isn't the kind of friend you call to cry with. She's the one you call when you need to burn down a system and build your case brick by brick. We met years ago at a Women in Tech legal workshop, back when I still thought NDAs were sacred and HR existed to protect employees. She was a corporate attorney then, sharp, no nonsense, and already tired of watching women get boxed out of their own achievements. Now she was running her own practice, specializing in workplace injustice. I sent her a photo of the clause and the note. "Is this real?" She called me before I could even brush my teeth. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice already full throttle. "My original contract, negotiated with legal back in 2020. She whistled. "Clause 9.4b? Udom wrote this?" "Yeah, buried it deep. I'll buy him a drink if this holds." That's how I ended up sitting across from her that afternoon, sipping bitter tea in her home office, my signed contract laid flat between us. Sophia read it twice, then a third time. "It's airtight," she said finally, tapping her finger on the clause. "I've seen dozens of severance disputes, Mariana. This isn't vague, it's written with full intent." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "But," she added, and I felt the tension snap back into place. "Crestmore won't admit they fired you without cause, especially not a week before bonus distributions. They'll say it was a restructure, performance realignment, maybe even a mutual separation." It wasn't," I said. "They never gave me a reason. They said it was final and not up for discussion." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Good," she said, "because now we need to prove it. That they didn't have cause. And that they knew it." "How?" She pulled out a yellow notepad, the legal kind that always makes me feel like I'm in an episode of Suits. Step 1. Documentation. Emails, Slack messages, calendar invites. Anything that shows they didn't flag your performance. No warnings, no improvement plans, no official complaints. I nodded. My performance reviews were glowing. I kept every one of them. I'll find the PDFs. Perfect. Step 2. Witnesses. Anyone who can confirm you weren't under scrutiny. Anyone who heard Oliver or HR say this was sudden or just a business decision. Tina, I said immediately. She saw it coming, said they were targeting the older employees for streamlining. And Dylan, our CEO, he said something in a meeting about wanting fresh thinking. Sophia's pen stopped. That's gold, especially if you can get her to confirm it in writing. Or better, on record. I looked at the contract again. It seemed smaller now. Not just a piece of paper, but a loaded weapon. A slingshot aimed right back at the Goliath that had tried to crush me. They fired me to save money, I said, and now it might cost them 7 figures. Correction, Sophia said, smiling. It will, if we do this right. She sat back in her chair, folding her arms. They're betting you'll stay quiet, that you'll lick your wounds, disappear, maybe send an angry email they can ignore. But Mariana? I looked up. This clause is a landmine, and you're standing on the trigger. I left with a folder of instructions, a checklist longer than my grocery list, and a fire in my chest I hadn't felt since my first big product launch. They thought they erased me. But now I was about to make myself unforgettable. I met Tina at a small cafe 2 blocks from our old office, the one we used to call our neutral zone, whenever we needed to vent without being heard through paper-thin conference room walls. She was already there when I arrived, curled into the corner booth with 2 coffees, both steaming, always knowing I'd need the stronger roast. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, I almost broke. She didn't smile. She didn't do the soft, pitying thing. She just nodded once, like a soldier acknowledging another survivor. They shouldn't have done it like that, she said before I even sat down. They didn't just do it, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. They calculated it. They waited until the week before bonuses. They thought I'd be too stunned to notice. Tina nodded slowly. You were right. The layoffs, they weren't performance-related. They were a cost-cutting strategy, and you weren't the only one. I leaned forward. What do you mean? She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and handed it to me. An internal memo, dated 2 days before I was fired. Subject line, Phase 2 Staffing Realignment, Pre-Bonus Adjustments. I stared at it. My name wasn't mentioned, but the timing, it lined up perfectly. They moved fast, Tina continued. The day after they let you go, they eliminated your whole team. Content strategy was officially folded into brand vision, which is just a fancy way of saying Ben's team absorbed the work. I felt something twist in my chest. They killed the entire department. She nodded grimly. And then, 2 days later, they announced a new enterprise partnership, $6 million in projected revenue starting this quarter alone. I blinked. They signed the Luxbridge contract? Tina's eyes widened. You didn't know? I wrote that proposal, I whispered. I spent 3 months negotiating the rollout strategy. That contract wouldn't exist without my team. She nodded again. Exactly. And now, thanks to that deal, this quarter's profits are projected to break the company's all-time record. Bonuses were going to be huge. I felt dizzy. That contract, my contract, was what they used to justify firing us. They eliminated the cost of our salaries to inflate profit margins just before Luxbridge revenue kicked in. They did this on purpose, I said. Tina looked away, jaw clenched. I heard Oliver in the hall the morning after you were let go. He was joking with Ben. Said something like, sometimes the cleanup pays for the fireworks. My stomach turned. They knew exactly what they were doing, I said. They fired us to make the quarter look better. But in doing that, they triggered a clause in my contract. Tina raised an eyebrow. A clause? If I'm terminated without cause within 30 days of the bonus, I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the photo of the paragraph. I'm entitled to 20% of the quarterly profits. Tina stared at it, then at me, then back at the screen. Holy hell! she whispered. They tried to save 30 grand, and they might owe you over $1 million? More, if the Luxbridge projections are real. For a moment, we sat there in silence, letting the enormity of it settle around us like dust in sunlight. I need your help, I said finally. Not to go public, not yet. But I need a record, a statement, something confirming what you've just told me. The timing, the restructuring, the contract signing. Tina didn't hesitate. Done. You're sure? They erased you, Mariana, but they forgot that people like you don't vanish quietly. You leave a trail, you build legacies. And now? Now you're holding the match. I exhaled. Slowly. This wasn't revenge. This was truth. And the truth had receipts. The courier showed up at 9:14 a.m. He had that practiced politeness of someone who knew he was delivering bad news. Sympathetic, but detached. I signed, thanked him, and closed the door with hands that were already beginning to shake. The envelope was thick. Crestmore's legal letterhead was raised in embossed silver. It felt ceremonial, like something handed out at an awards ceremony, except this wasn't recognition. It was war. I opened it slowly, my mind already spinning. Sophia had filed a legal notice 2 days earlier, citing the clause in my contract and formally requesting confirmation of the nature of my dismissal. The company had until Friday to respond. They didn't wait. I sat at my kitchen table, the soft hum of the fridge suddenly too loud, and unfolded the first page. The words hit harder than I expected. Pursuant to the employment agreement signed July 3, 2020, and in response to legal inquiry, we confirm that Mariana Ortiz was terminated for cause. Specifically, for repeated misconduct, submission of falsified internal documentation, and failure to meet performance expectations during the most recent quarter. I blinked. Read it again. And again. They weren't just trying to avoid paying my bonus. They were trying to bury me. I flipped through the attached pages. Scans of performance warnings. One dated January 15th. Another March 8th. Both unsigned by me. Both with language so coldly impersonal, it was obvious I hadn't touched them. Employee has been advised to cease manipulation of performance data used in internal reporting. Failure to adhere to internal review guidelines. Falsified campaign success metrics noted. And then, stapled behind them, my alleged Q1 performance evaluation. A document I'd never seen. It had a needs improvement rating across the board, with vague bullet points about leadership instability, inadequate collaboration with brand strategy, and discrepancies in content reporting. I felt the nausea climb from my gut to my throat. None of it was true. Worse, it didn't even exist before now. I knew it. I could feel it. Because I remember every review I've ever had at that company, including the one in February where Oliver told me to my face that I was one of the few anchors keeping this place sane. My phone rang. Sophia. I didn't even say hello. They're saying I forged documents, I choked out. I read it, she said, calm but tight. I got the email version 10 minutes ago. You okay? They created these after the fact, Sophia. I never saw these. There was no warning, no review, no underperformance claim. I believe you, she said. This is retaliation, plain and simple. They're fabricating documentation to establish cause retroactively. It's a desperate move. I stood up, pacing now, one hand in my hair. They're not just trying to void the clause, I said. They're trying to destroy my name. Yes, she agreed, because they know it's your strongest weapon. If they can paint you as dishonest, they discredit the entire claim. And you walk away with nothing. I stopped pacing. Can we prove this? Sophia didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Every internal file they've submitted has metadata. We'll request native format access through Discovery. Once we have the original creation and edit timestamps, it'll be obvious if they were backdated. They think I won't fight, I said, quieter now. No, she said. They think you'll be too scared to. I sat back down and opened my email archives. It didn't matter that my Crestmore access was revoked. I'd forwarded copies of every major project summary, campaign result, and performance review to my personal account long before the axe fell. Not out of paranoia, but out of habit. When you've worked in a volatile startup long enough, you learn to keep receipts. And oh, I had receipts. Oliver's effusive praise of our March content launch. Dylan's Slack message with fire emojis and best numbers we've had all year. Even an email from HR, 2 weeks before my dismissal, saying I was being considered for a cross-functional leadership summit. Not the kind of messages you send someone under investigation for falsified metrics. I scrolled through, building a digital trail in my mind. Every compliment, every request to show others how you're doing it, every calendar invite titled Strategy Alignment with Mariana, mandatory. And then I found the one that made my stomach drop. An email from Ben, the smug SEO guy who'd been circling my team like a vulture. To Oliver and HR. Looping in for Q2 realignment. I recommend streamlining Mariana's group into ours. It'll eliminate redundancies and let us consolidate oversight before the Luxbridge launch. Can we align on messaging for post-bonus exit? The timestamp? 2 days before I was fired. 2 days before the so-called warning was dated. I forwarded it to Sophia immediately. 5 minutes later, she texted, "They're done." That line alone proves premeditated financial manipulation. And the post-bonus phrasing? This just turned into something bigger than severance. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. They tried to forge my downfall, but in doing so, they left fingerprints all over the scene. And now? Now I wasn't just going after my bonus. I was coming for everything. It happened on a Monday, 5 days after the company's laughable response had arrived. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, picking up one of my mom's heart meds, the same prescription I'd planned to pay off in full with my bonus, when Sophia's name lit up on my phone. I didn't even wait for her to speak. "What did you find?" "You need to sit down," she said, voice laced with something between triumph and barely contained fury. "I got the files." I stepped out of line and ducked into the small side alcove next to the blood pressure machine. "What files?" "The original Word docs, your so-called evaluations and formal warnings." A contact of mine pulled the server-side metadata straight from Crestmore's internal SharePoint. I held my breath. The documents were created 3 days after your termination. Not just edited, created, from scratch. My chest tightened. "You're sure?" "I have the timestamps. I have the author logs. I even have the version history showing Oliver's edits. He literally titled the file Q1 Performance Revision, Final. And guess what? The first save was made at 7:38 p.m., the day after you were escorted out. I laughed, stunned. That's not just a mistake. That's textbook falsification. "It's perjury if they submit it as legal defense," Sophia said. "And if they used it to justify avoiding your payout, it's financial fraud, corporate malfeasance." I leaned against the wall, one hand on my chest. They created fake documents after I was gone. That's not a strategy. That's a cover-up. "They knew they had no cause," she said, "so they made one up." I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just watched people shuffle past me, unaware that the most important moment of my life had just landed with the force of a quiet, righteous explosion. "They didn't just fire me to cut costs," I said finally. "They slandered me to make sure I couldn't come back." Sophia's voice softened. "And now we've caught them with their hands in the edit log." "I want to use it," I said. "I want this to go public. Let them try to justify firing someone who brought in their biggest account of the year, then backdate lies to dodge their own contract." "We will," she promised, "but not yet. First, we present it to them privately. Give them one shot to settle. And if they don't? Then we bury them." I walked home in a haze of adrenaline and fury, replaying every conversation I'd had with Oliver over the past 6 months. Every half-smile, every "thanks for holding the fort." He'd known. Or if he hadn't then, he'd gone along with it after. At home, I opened my inbox to find a folder from Sophia marked Timestamps Evidence. Inside were screenshots, file properties, server logs. The January warning, created April 5th. The Q1 evaluation, April 6th. Both tagged to Oliver's employee ID. Neither existed before I was locked out of the system. They weren't just bad at lying, they were careless. And now they had no idea I was holding the receipts. The kind that don't just expose a lie. The kind that bring entire empires down. The message came from an unfamiliar number. Just a plain text with no greeting. "Mariana, it's Eli, from accounting. I need to talk to you. I have something you need to see." Eli Brooks. Quiet, meticulous, perpetually overlooked. He was the guy who always sat near the window during town halls, headphones half in, eyes scanning spreadsheets, even when everyone else was clapping. We only spoke occasionally, mostly around budget reviews or campaign forecasts, but I always liked him. He didn't posture, he just worked. I replied instantly, "What's going on?" His answer came 2 minutes later. "I was let go a week after you, but not before I backed up some files. Can we meet?" We picked a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the office. It was one of those tucked-away indie places with exposed brick, oversteeped tea, and a barista who treated foam like performance art. Eli was already seated when I arrived, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of black coffee. He looked thinner than I remembered, and tired. "I didn't know who else to call," he said quietly, "but I heard what they're trying to say about you. The forged evals, the data manipulation. It's crap, I know it. You know it, but they're doubling down." I nodded. "They're terrified of what I know." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a flash drive. Matte black, no label, just clean and cold, like a loaded weapon. "This has the original profit and loss reports for Q2, he said. "The real ones, not the revised versions they handed the board after you were gone." I stared at it. "You're saying they doctored the financials?" "I'm saying they inflated the operational margin by deleting pending liabilities and pre-booking Luxbridge revenue before the contract was executed. That alone padded profits by almost $3.4 million, which, conveniently, increased Dylan's bonus bracket and justified the layoffs." "And my termination?" I asked. He looked away, jaw tight. "They knew that clause in your contract would trigger, so they manufactured cause. I was there when the financial controller asked if legal had flagged your agreement. Oliver told him, 'We're handling that internally.'" "Jesus," I whispered. "That's not even the worst part," Eli said, lowering his voice. "They also tried to bury the performance mapping data you showed Dylan. You know, the tool you built to track team contributions? I watched Ben delete the database instance from the cloud repo the night after your dismissal." I felt something sharp twist in my chest. That tool, my side project, was supposed to be our insurance, our way of proving value. Now it was gone, scrubbed. "But I had backups," Eli added. "And logs. I always pull logs. You'd be shocked how careless they are with admin credentials." I took the flash drive slowly, like it might burn through my fingers. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw the weight behind his eyes. "Because I asked a question," he said. "Just one. About the Luxbridge revenue entry. And 2 days later, I was told my role was being eliminated due to structural overlap. And now I want the truth out there, even if my name never shows up on it." I nodded. "It might get ugly." He gave a bitter smile. "It's already ugly. But if they want to play dirty, they should have picked a target who didn't keep backups." He finished his coffee, stood, and pulled his hood over his head. "Be careful, Mariana. They're not going down without a fight." I watched him walk out, flash drive gripped tight in my hand. Inside it were numbers they couldn't rewrite, proof they couldn't forge, and maybe, just maybe, the nail in the coffin of a company that thought no one was watching. But they forgot one thing. Some of us never stop watching, and some of us never forget where we hid the bodies. It was a Wednesday morning when Sophia called and said, "It's time." We'd spent the past week organizing everything, cross-referencing file timestamps, lining up the forged evaluations with my real reviews, matching the doctored financial summaries with Eli's originals. Every screenshot, every deleted Slack, every shady email that hinted, joked, or flat out admitted what they'd done. This wasn't just about my contract anymore. This was a corporate cancer. And we were about to hold up the X-ray. The meeting was set at an off-site legal office downtown. Crestmore's outside counsel would be there, along with a representative from HR and, of course, Oliver. The one who started it. The one who smirked when he signed my execution order, thinking I'd just fade out of view. Sophia and I arrived early. She wore black like armor. I wore steel gray slacks, a blazer I hadn't touched in months, and the faintest touch of lipstick. Not for vanity, but for clarity. I wanted them to see my face. I wanted them to remember who they'd tried to silence. They filed in exactly at 10 a.m. Oliver looked right at me, then quickly down at his folder. HR's rep, Susan, a woman who once cried laughing at my baby shower, couldn't even meet my gaze. The corporate attorney, some polished shark from a high-rise firm, nodded once and opened his binder. Sophia began. As you're aware, we're here to address the circumstances surrounding the termination of Mariana Ortiz, specifically the claim that it was for cause, and the subsequent denial of her contractual compensation. She pulled out a printout of my contract and slid it across the table. Clause 9.4b, 20% of quarterly net profit, payable upon termination without cause within 30 days of bonus disbursement. She let it hang for a moment. Then she smiled. And we're here to show you that not only was the termination without cause, it was followed by an orchestrated cover-up involving falsified HR documents and fraudulent financial reporting. The attorney blinked. Those are strong allegations. We have strong evidence, Sophia replied, and reached into her bag. What followed was methodical, clinical, devastating. First, the documents, the forged warnings, the negative performance review, each presented side by side with internal server metadata, creation timestamps after my dismissal, author tags leading directly to Oliver. The attorney looked visibly rattled. Then the performance history, real emails, Slack screenshots, calendar invites that clearly showed my leadership role up to the moment I was fired. Comments like stellar Q1 metrics and Mariana's team continues to outperform projections. Then came the death blow, the flash drive. Sophia handed it to the legal team with a polite smile. That contains internal accounting files provided by a former employee. Files that show Q2 financials were manipulated post-deal. Pending liabilities were scrubbed, Luxbridge revenue pre-booked, and bonus calculations adjusted to maximize executive payout while justifying mass layoffs. She turned to Oliver. It also contains deleted versions of Mariana's content mapping tool, the one that proved which teams were actually generating value, the same tool that was mysteriously wiped 2 hours after her termination. The room was silent. The attorney flipped through his notes, visibly sweating. Susan was pale. Oliver shifted in his chair, trying to reclaim his usual arrogant posture. But it didn't stick, because he knew. He'd been caught. Let's be clear, Sophia said, folding her hands. We don't want this to go public. Mariana doesn't want a scandal. But what she does want, and what she is legally entitled to, is the bonus owed to her under her agreement, including damages. The attorney cleared his throat. What kind of damages are we talking? Sophia didn't flinch. Full payout of the 20% clause, based on Q2's actual profit, not the inflated version. Immediate retraction of any documentation related to fabricated misconduct, and a written apology from Crestmore confirming the termination was not for cause. And if we don't agree? Oliver finally asked, voice tight. Sophia looked at me. I leaned forward. Then I give all of this, I said softly, to the SEC, the Labor Board, and every single reporter in this city with a business desk. And trust me, they will eat you alive. Oliver's mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had nothing to say. I smiled. That silence? It tasted better than any bonus ever could. The offer came 3 days later. Crestmore's legal team sent a clean, terse email confirming the company's agreement to pay the full amount stipulated in Clause 9.4b. $3,162. Not a penny less. No negotiations. No red lines. Just quiet surrender. The settlement also included a separate clause: acknowledgement that my termination was not for cause, the immediate purge of all related performance documentation, and a full formal apology, signed by both HR and CEO Dylan Mercer. But I wasn't done. Before Sophia signed anything, I added 2 non-negotiables of my own. First, I said, Eli Brooks gets $100,000 as an external contractor. Consider it consulting fees for services rendered. Sophia raised her eyebrow, impressed. You're paying him out of your share? No, I said. They are. He risked his career to expose their fraud. They can call it whatever they want, but they will write him that check. Sophia added it without blinking. And Tina, I continued, she gets a letter of recommendation, on letterhead, from Dylan Mercer himself, stating she led critical cross-functional operations and helped secure the company's largest enterprise partnership. She gets credit, period. Sophia just nodded. I'll make it ironclad. The response from the company was delayed. A few hours? Maybe someone in legal tried to protest. But eventually, it came through. Accepted. The wire transfer arrived a week later, in full. No payment plan, no installment gimmicks, just cold, clean justice. I stared at my bank screen for a long time, watching that balance sit there like something sacred. Not because of the number, but because of what it meant. I had survived. Not just the betrayal, but the erasure, the humiliation, the soul-splintering moment of being told I no longer mattered, and I had turned it into power. The first thing I did was pay every one of my mother's medical bills, the specialists, the backlogged procedures, the private nurse she needed but couldn't afford. I walked into the billing office with a check and walked out with a smile and a receipt. The second thing I did was buy a house. A modest one, but right on the coast. White stucco, teal shutters, and an ocean view that greeted me every morning like a soft, salt-touched promise. You made it. I helped Tina transition into a new role with a better company. I connected Eli with a legal nonprofit that now uses his forensic accounting expertise to fight corruption. And I made anonymous donations to a few former colleagues who had been quietly pushed out, just like I had been. No strings, no credit, just small justice. And then, I wrote one anonymous review. It wasn't spiteful, it wasn't dramatic, it was detailed, factual, and devastatingly honest. I posted it on a workplace transparency site under the title, Built by Loyalty, Broken by Greed. I detailed the culture of silencing, the empty buzzwords, the quiet discrimination, the lies about bonuses, the forced exits. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Because the truth has a resonance that no PR statement can smother. The post went viral within a week, and within a month, Crestmore's rating tanked. Recruiters started pulling back. Candidates asked hard questions. The company began bleeding the exact kind of fresh thinkers they had once so desperately courted. They tried to erase me, but in the end, I erased them first. One cool spring evening, I stood on the back porch of my new home, the ocean murmuring just beyond the dunes. I opened a bottle of champagne, the good kind, and poured one glass. I didn't toast revenge. I toasted restoration. I toasted every woman who has been silenced, then rose up louder. I toasted the fire it takes to hold your ground, and the grace it takes not to burn it all down. And then I sat down, legs crossed, glass in hand, and watched the sun melt into the sea. Because after all of it, the betrayal, the breakdown, the battle, I had something I never thought I'd get back. My dignity, my power, my peace. And I wasn't giving them up for anyone.